And I would say, probably not directly in line with what you might be organizing on, but I would say that over the next 5 years, we will be looking in Washington for appropriate policy handles that recognize that fight for land rights and land tenure and bring it into the halls of Congress.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Ruth. In real recognition of all the work that you're doing and that you can only do certain areas in that work, I recognize in the world today that anti-Semitism seems to be on the rise again. And I'm wondering if you have any words of wisdom as to what we might do about that.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do? Please don't let me, nobody let me forget that answer when they pull the plug on me up here. I'm going to do that near the end. No, because it takes us a little further afield, but it's not unconnected to our work. I have to go to Mid-Next because she traveled with me. I know, but I'm not going to you out of turn. She hefted a lot of cinder blocks in Muchachuchu, Mexico.
That's what I was going to say. I had the privilege of being with Ruth and a number of other rabbis schlepping cinder blocks through the jungles in the Yucatan in the unpronounceable town of Muchachuca, where I think the most profound of many learnings was the great interconnectedness of all of our decisions, how United States concepts of what is pollution ends up influencing the livelihood of farmers in isolated villages, how the concept of the destination wedding comes on the backs of indigenous peoples of Mexico, and how much better Ruth is at schlepping concrete blocks through the jungle than I am. So if you have not had the opportunity to go on an HAWS trip, I would urge you all to do so. It is profoundly life-altering in the best ways, so thank you.
And the good news or the bad news, depending on how you want your exercise, is we don't do service trips anymore. So Min and I were part of that effort. The AJ has a huge number of flyers here about the rabbinic cohort and the rabbinic student cohort of our Global Justice Fellowship. But briefly, it's a competitive process. The 18 or 20 people who are chosen each year are committed to us for 1 or 2 nights a month. In the case of rabbis, obviously it's national, so a lot of the Hevruta study is by webinar. And then to one 8 to 10 day trip. This particular cohort will be going to the Dominican Republic, where you will, instead of cinder blocks, actually live as a community, meet 4 or 5 or 6 of our different partners so you understand the big range of difference in who we help and how they come to their own visions of justice, and where you will learn from us about the issues, the policy advocacy issues on which we want you to become expert and go back and write and lobby in Washington. So it's easier than the cinder blocks, but it's heavy on the mind. Yes, sir.
First off, my mother, who was still living in New York at the time, voted for you as mayor. And all I can say is that New York's loss was the world's gain.
Thank you very much.
To touch the third rail here, the issue, I know that human rights as a member of Trua is something that gets a lot of bad mouth in the Jewish community. And especially, I think it comes up in regards to Israel-Palestine issues. And my heart goes out to HAWS in how you negotiate that which is also an issue of human rights, and where there's also great devastation as well. So I'm just leaving this as an open question rather than challenge you in any particular way, but I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about
Okay,
that.
I'm going to get to that with the other question.
Okay.
I can defer. Let's take these 2 first.
Well, this question dovetails exactly with Rabbi Cooper's question. I'm very troubled by the record that the Jewish National Fund has had with regard to the Bedouin. And I'm wondering, are you guys on friendly terms? Can you do some behind the scenes, how do you deal with that? And what do I say to congregants about that?
And that's it. I'm going to get, but let me just hit the last couple of questions and then try to weave all of this together. These are these are kinds of questions I hope this group would ask, and I want to say that I think All right, we'll just remind you. I'll get to it. Go ahead. Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I've
That's what they say before the really tough questions.
I've also been in the struggle a long time. I started out over 60 years ago as an 11-year-old kid handing out Stevenson for President flyers on my street.
Oh, say, I was 12 in that election, so I know just what you're talking about.
And I remember you on the city council in New York. Two issues arise for me. The first is in the past, the second is in the present. The genocide in Darfur was absolutely something that had to be stopped. But my question is, genocide had been going on in Sudan for decades. Nobody was interested until it spread to Darfur in the oil-producing part of Sudan.
Go ahead.
So that's my first issue. My second issue, and if you told us about your kids' Lego blocks, my response would be, are those blocks made in China? No, virtually no major world human rights organizations, Human Rights Watch is the rare exception, does anything to touch on the Chinese oppression in Tibet, in East Turkestan, in South Mongolia. And it seems to me this is largely because China can retaliate and these other countries cannot. Is AJWS doing anything about China?
Okay. All right. Last question. I'm collecting these right now. I will answer all of them. Oh, I'm sorry. Go.
Just to piggyback a little bit on what Martha said. Climate change, obviously in circumstances of climate change, there will be no foundation for supporting human rights in many countries. Things will crumble. But more generally, the foundation for human rights is in a healthy environment and ecological sustainability. So AJWS is really the only human rights organization in the Jewish community, and one of the few, period, that makes that connection. What can we do, what can AJWS do to make that part of the conversation for all the human rights organizations in the Jewish world, because they are very much with blinders on and myopic around that question.
Good. Last question.
Thank you for your leadership and for your passion.
Speak up a little bit.
Thank you for your leadership and your passion and inspiration. I get overwhelmed, I'll tell you honestly. And I would like for a small little community I'm starting for the high holidays to do a small, simple to speak project so people can use this part of their dedication to the one time of year many Jews do want to connect with a piece of tikkun. So anything you can offer in the way of something simple, it's accessible and relevant.
Okay, so I'm going to try to weave together a lot of these questions about all the things that we don't do. But then look for more comment and hopefully some discussion over lunch and whatever. So first of all, on the last question, I'm going to say something heretical, which is if you're looking for a small project, or you have B'nai Mitzvah kids who are looking for their community service project, some of which is really bad. You need to follow the maxim that we follow in the developing world, and that is start where people are. So in my judgment, although two of my grandchildren who've been bar and bat mitzvah didn't follow this advice and used the excuse that I was their grandmother. But I think by and large, B'nai Mitzvah projects should be as close to home as possible. I think they should be thought out. I want to suggest to you, I'm now talking about AJWS, I'm just talking. I want to suggest to you that the connection that I hope you will make is the connection between service and advocacy. It is not enough, with all due respect to thousands of Jewish 12-year-olds all over the world, just to go to the senior citizen home 2 Sundays and play checkers, or visit, which a lot of young people, of course, are attracted to do, animal shelters. You is in this case prayerfully, you through the parents who are supposed to get engaged in these efforts, need to say something about why is this a problem. What you're doing is wonderful, but what is behind, fill in the blank, these kids being in 2 large classrooms, so they don't learn to read. The rules, I mean, I met a wonderful young woman, I think in Chicago, where I spoke recently, who knew about 500 times more than I did about something called puppy mills, which I'd never heard of. And what she was doing with petitions and speaking in her regular public school, organizing young people, I'm against puppy mills. Okay, that's making change. Petting animals for a Sunday, or even 52 Sundays, as fun as it is not making change. And it tends, I'm going to be really getting in trouble here, but it tends to make these young people feel too important. Okay, this is a rite of passage. We want them to understand about the world. The world is a messy, complicated, difficult place. They don't need to hear that whole litany of all the problems that I read. It's enough trouble moving them through. But you know what? They know a lot more than we think they know. And so my granddaughter, who's now a freshman in college, did Darfur. But I'll tell you a story about her cousin. So this is 4 years ago, and his parents actually said, you have to pick a project to talk about on your bar mitzvah, and you have to talk to grandma about it. Yeah. So I said, like Jonah, I don't actually think they should have done that. I think you should think of something that matters to you and your community. He said, no, I've been thinking about it, I know about your work. Can we talk about hungry children and children with AIDS? So I said, sure. So we went to the computer, and I was showing him our website. I said, the one thing is you're going to raise money for a project. It ought to be a project I visited so I can tell you about it. So I'm talking to him about these projects. This is a slightly long story, forgive me. And his 8-year-old sister has got her head in between his head and my head in the computer screen, because that's who she is. And all of a sudden he says to her, Lila, please leave the room. So you can imagine her shrieks. So I said, Lila, this is for your brother. It's up to him. So with much leaving the room and listening at the door, she's gone, and he says to me, actually, I didn't want Lila to hear this, but I want to do something about child soldiers. So I said, Jonah, how do you know about child soldiers? He said, it's on the History Channel. So I actually went out and said to his parents, you're going to be sorry. So this kid learned about rehabilitated child soldiers, rehabilitating other child soldiers in northern Uganda, but the point is he knew about it already. And he did his presentation connecting it to the Parsha, but talking about commitment to make social change. So I got distracted, but I just want to say, when you're looking for a project, including a small, easy project, if you have the chutzpah to say that because of AJWS and our great website, you'd like to make it a global issue, I'll make a suggestion in a minute. But I would really start with, like, what are the things in the world that bother you? And some people will say, by the way, I gave you a long presentation on violence against women. 1 in every 4 women on a college campus in the United States is a victim of violence, so start there. Go after your local, a lot of you are from all over the country, as someone said, not San Francisco or Philadelphia. Not that they're immune from this, but go to these large universities and ask what their policies are. California has just voted, I don't know what it's called, but a yes means yes policy, which means basically that you have to give permission for every, I don't know, sexual, it's not sexual act, every action in a I don't know what's called, making out. So but you know what I mean. So I'm just saying, like, find out what's on people's minds first. If you want to bring us to their attention, then I would say that this International Violence Against Women Act is a good thing, because I can give you other groups that are concerned about it, other faith-based groups, the great presentation from North Carolina about other people in your community that have this issue. It's a place to make some common cause, build some lines, and I'm now going way off of my presentation, but some of you, over these next 3 months with your congregations, ought to sit down with Muslims in your community. There's nobody who's hurting more from all of this than the Islamic community in this country. The fastest growing religious community, as I said, when I tell people that Muslims are the victims of a genocide in Burma, they say, no, you got it backwards. I mean, these are people who are really hurting. And if you know some local imams, I would think about that dialogue before I think about almost anything else. And just educating your own congregation that sadly, virtually every religion in the world from time immemorial has had fundamentalists, including ours, who don't always respect other people's rights. Anyway, that was a lot of thoughts, but if you want to organize around the International Violence Against Women Act, we'll give you lots of material, and it's relatively easy. And it can include both the advocacy work that I talked about and raising money and sending a dust and saying, this is for the We Believe campaign. And there's lots of literature about all that here. Okay, all the things we don't do. We don't work in China, so we don't work on China. I don't deny a single thing you said. Frankly, the reason we never went into China is it's just much too big for us to even begin to be able to think about finding one of our thematic areas and connecting. So it's not like other countries where we work. We do a huge amount of work in India. But India actually has the structures, not so enamored of their elected officials right now, but the structures of a government and a democracy. And it has, by the way, a law against girls being married before the age of 18, despite the fact that 53% of the women were married before the age of 18. But it's a structure that we can work on. So China just never offered that to us, so we're not there, but I agree with you. The question is, where are things made? What are trade agreements? The bigger picture there, which is the comment about Darfur, is absolutely right. Look, Samantha Power, who is a friend of mine, is now, I think, thank God, our ambassador to the United Nations. It's harder to be in the hot seat in the government than not, but if you never read her book about genocide, which is a problem called A Problem from Hell, America and something about genocide, read it, because it makes the case that the only time the U.S. intervenes seriously in large international issues is if our economic interests are at stake. And that's not the country that we all want to believe that we live in. But there's no question that that's why Darfur got attention. There's no question that there were religious killings and ethnic cleansing in Sudan long before Bashir turned his attention on Darfur. There's no question that we got involved late. And by the way, mentioning Sam Brownback, who got mentioned before, Sam Brownback, who absolutely has done the world's worst possible job as governor. And the only good news is he's cut the budget so badly that there's a rebellion. There are actually people who think there should be some tax money for schools. So, but Sam Brownback was a hero on Darfur before anybody else in the Congress was paying attention. We worked, David Saperstein's name was mentioned. I worked closely with David, with Sam Brownback. And Sam Brownback's commitment to Sudan and to the earlier genocides in Sudan was entirely faith-based. He was there. Darfur is a case of Arab-leaning Muslims against African-leaning Muslims, but the previous genocides in Sudan were the Arab-leaning Muslim government against the Christians in South Sudan. And that's when the Christian evangelical community got involved in Sudan. And we could not have moved the Darfur issue without some of them, including Senator Brownback. So to the general notion of, make friends with people, colleagues on issues, on issues that you can. Well, it's not make friends with your enemies. It's make friends with people and work with people. And it's true in the example I gave within the congregation, and it's true across faith lines, and it's certainly true with regard to elected officials. Find the issues on which you agree with people and target those. So I also agree with the shout out for Human Rights Watch and the implied shout out to TRUA, which does extraordinary work. Now, okay, so we don't work in China. Now it gets to be a little more difficult. I think I gave you the answer on climate change. I'm happy to be a voice on the pieces of that problem that we can speak to, which is, I'll send it to Arthur and then you'll all have it in a minute. It's this question of who owns the land. And this is an issue, to go back to America, this is an issue on which our government is in general terrible. That's the problem on the food aid. I'm talking about our government, is supported by people who own mineral companies, own oil drilling companies, own large multinational agribusinesses, and their interest in the part of the world where I work is not my interest. And so we're all looking, and again, we're doing this across faith lines, but for levers to get our government to pay more attention to issues when it's not just a direct economic question. Okay, now here's the most difficult thing. I'm sorry, I don't want to end on this, so we'll think of something else to end with. But we have articulated increasingly over the years, and we're proud of this, that we are a human rights organization, and I gave you some definitions of what we mean and how we work on it. But we don't work on human rights in the Middle East because we don't work in the Middle East. If we don't work in the Middle East, because of the critical importance of having Jews and Jewish leaders and Jewish organizations working on issues of religious tolerance, land use, economic development, and human rights in the Middle East is a full-time job. And Trua takes on a piece of it, and all of you know all of the coexistence organizations in Israel and some of their friends here, and they do extraordinary work. But I discovered when I came to AJWS that what's now called Bend the Arc was doing some work on policy issues in the United States. And this vast array of powerful organizations, who wish they were more powerful, were working on issues of human rights and policy change in Israel and Palestine. And they left me the rest of the world, and it's big enough. So, I mean, that's it. So I appreciate it. Now, there's a piece that's connected to that, which was the question about anti-Semitism. So since we don't work in China and we don't work in the Middle East, we also don't work in France, for which right now I'm very grateful. But those are also huge issues. I don't want to begin for a minute to suggest that I know nearly enough about this. I just want to say, as a consumer of information, I want to be very careful, because I'm also like to be considered a leader in the Jewish community, to make sure I have full information as to what these upsurges of anti-Semitism, anti-magazine, anti-Islam, I mean, I just want to keep them in context. I want to feel free for our community, I don't do this when places I don't work, to speak out on them. But I want to say what I hope was obvious by my remarks, and that is, every place that American Jewish World Service works on issues of global human rights, we are teaching people that Jews are people who care about social justice. There is no better way to be seen, for the Jewish community to be seen in the 21st century. It's how we are seen, and I mentioned this to you before, and I'm going to say it again, it's how, because of AJWS, and not just AJWS, also Trua, also the RAC, but I'm telling you, you have no idea how often non-Jewish members of Congress and major Christian and secular faith-based organizations in Washington say some version to me of, I didn't know Jews were interested in this work. It's a tragedy, folks. It is our history. The civil rights movement, the labor movement. Here's another, getting all my side comments. Here's another thing you could all do. There's an entire generation of young Jews, some of whom are concerns of many of you, I know, who know nothing about the history of Jews in America in the 20th century. They don't know the role we played in the labor movement, they don't know the role we played in the women's movement, they don't know the role we played in the civil rights movement. It doesn't need to be in Selma, but we do have young people who need to learn these issues, because it makes it clearer who we really are. So, then I will close. I definitely am closing.